Welcome back to another episode of Sound Pals Go to the Movies. I'm here with my friend Touly. Say hi, Touly.
Hi, guys.
And today we're going to be reviewing Ghostbusters Afterlife. And just a fair warning, there's going to be spoilers up ahead, so you've been warned. When a single mother and her two kids arrive into a small town, they begin to discover their connection to the original Ghostbusters and the secret legacy their grandfather left them behind. So I'm going to begin with my pros, like always. My first pro has to be the actress Mackenzie Grace and how do I say this? Her transformation to a smaller version of Egon was amazing. I mean, the awkwardness was right on spot. Plus, I felt closer to the end of the movie that family bond came through. Also, the actor Paul Rudd's character was funny and it played well with the two kids, Phoebe and Podcast, but he never overstepped the young actors, so they had like a good chemistry on set. That's how I felt. And also, a cool Easter egg that I didn't even know was that Ivo Sandor was played by J.K. Simmons. I actually came to that realization when I was reading the credits at the end of the movie, and I was like, how can I miss that? Next pro is all the Easter eggs from the equipment, Ecto-1, the puffs, the version of the Slimer, and all these other gadgets and gizmos that we see from the original to here. Even the villain Gozer and her dogs, even though we already saw it, I kind of liked it in a sense. It kept it simple and it was easy for people who haven't seen the original ones, like maybe kids. They basically can still follow the story along. While you, on the other hand, you kind of have this nostalgia trip throughout the movie, and that's what I kind of liked about it. Next is the idea that the film was also sort of a goodbye letter to Harold Ramis, with all his friends in the movie letting his character in spirit take the spotlight at the end of the movie. And yes, it was filled with nostalgia, like I said before, but mostly the idea of family and friends saying goodbye to an old friend. And talking about characters, having Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, and Ernie Hudson come back and reprise the roles alongside Annie Potts and the other people that we saw at the ending credits, this movie was me becoming a child again and watching this movie. I mean, I enjoyed the first one when I saw it, and this one kind of looked like they were passing on the baton from the older generation about to retire to the younger generation, which was Trevor and Phoebe and Podcast. And having that little scene at the end with Ernie Hudson, Winston, talking to Janice and saying that he wanted to leave a legacy behind and, you know, teach their kids something. And we see the final scene of him going inside a building and going to a familiar machine that turns on. I mean, that kind of, for me, made it like, you know, this is the ending chapter of our Ghostbusters, and we are opening another chapter to a new generation of Ghostbusters. So now on to my cons. Some people might see it as a con, but I didn't, but I'm still going to put it out there. The story seemed like it was just a reskinned version of Ghostbusters, but to me, I think it played well in the sense that people who hadn't seen it, for them is a new movie, but for me, it's just reskinned, and I can see it as them cheating their way through the storyline. Yes, we get most of the characters, most of the storyline and everything seeming familiar, but maybe that's what they really were intending to. Next is the setting, how they try to connect the setting from there to New York and vice versa, and having this, I would say, generation gap that people didn't know about the original Ghostbusters because it was in 1984. I mean, if something significant happened in 1984, as what happened in Manhattan, I think it would still be relevant. And for them not to believe in ghosts when they had that event in New York in 1984, and plus even Ghostbusters 2, there was another attack there. So that little thing kind of like threw me off, saying, wait, you know, these people don't believe in ghosts when there was Ghostbusters and a second Ghostbusters. So that was a con on my end too. There were some little gaps in the storyline that wouldn't really make sense. Also, the other con is how the daughter of Egon, she felt that he left her, but we didn't really see that. And I mean, it would have been nice if there was some flashbacks. I'm not saying that, you know, flashbacks every second, but just a big one at the beginning of the movie, him leaving her and just basically from her point of view, her eye level, just seeing probably like the shoes or something just walk out on her, and that would probably establish the hurt she was feeling throughout her life. Because at the end, she does come around and realize what he did was for the best. So I guess with that, I'm going to pass it on to my friend Touly, see how he saw the movie and what grade he gave the movie.
When I first saw the teaser for Ghostbusters Afterlife, I was very excited about watching the film. That was, of course, before COVID came around, which then significantly delayed the movie until this past week. So it has been a long time coming. The anticipation has been there, and for me, me personally, Ghostbusters means a lot because it was one of the few films that as a kid I watched over and over. Although it is in part a comedic film, it was scary as well, but because of how the movie was presented, as far as the direction and the feel and everything, with the mixture of the comedy, the acting, the actors and actresses, the props and everything, even though it felt scary at times, I still, as a kid, found myself watching it over and over because I just enjoyed it. So going into this film, I didn't want to put too much pressure on the film in thinking that it can do better than the original, because the original to me is so well done in so many facets that I felt it was going to be difficult for Ghostbusters Afterlife to one-up it, which is good mostly because I didn't set my expectations too high so that I would come out feeling miserable if certain things didn't live up to what I wanted the film to be. But with that being said though, the things that I did like about the film, a couple of things that I already touched upon. I love the nostalgia of the film that for the most part worked for it. I'll come back to this in my con. As a kid, my parents bought me some of the merchandises. I remember playing with the trap toy that my parents bought me, and it came with like this glow-in-the-dark little ghost figurine that you could place on top of the trap, and then you step on the trigger and then the trap opens and that figure falls into the trap. And so seeing all the things that were from the original in terms of like the props, that was great. Even the characters, as the movie was progressing, I was able to identify, hey, this character is like this character from the original. Of course, Phoebe, who again I'm going to give props to as well as being my favorite character in the film, being the granddaughter of Egon. Podcast, who after seeing how he act and talk and his just physical presence, I was like, hey, this guy's like Ray from the original Ghostbuster. And then of course the mom sort of like represented Dana in a sense with her relationship to Paul Rudd's character, who then represented Lewis's character from the original. I think for me, Finn Wolfhard, who played Phoebe's brother Trevor, he reminded me of Peter from the original Ghostbuster in relationship to how, he was interested in this girl that he met when the family moved to Somerville. And then, of course, we get cameo appearances from Bill Murray himself, Dan Aykroyd, Ernie Hudson, who I met in person at a convention. So, seeing him in the movie was nice. The two big surprises in terms of cameo that I wasn't expecting, just because I didn't look on IMDb, just the cast list of the movie before I went to go watch it, was Annie Potts and Dana in the film. That was very nice. I was already expecting Peter, Ray, and Winston to be in the film, but definitely wasn't expecting Annie and Dana. So seeing them in there was a very nice touch. But I just noticed all these character resemblances to like the original, which for the most part worked for me, but in a way it sort of took away from the film too. And kind of like how I mentioned about nostalgia, I'll mention it later too in terms of like the originality of the film, where it was sort of lacking in that. But a little bit more still on the pros about the film. At least 2/3 going into the film, I really liked what I saw in terms of establishing certain characters, in particular Phoebe Gruberson, the teacher played by Paul Rudd, and Podcast. I would say like those are the three main stars for me. How they were interested in the supernatural, which again coincides with the concept of Ghostbusters and trying to investigate what's going on, albeit it was kind of minimal. I would have liked to see more of the investigation. That's something I was more accustomed to watching the original Ghostbusters. Just seeing these characters, how they felt comfortable being around one another, despite each individual's quirkiness, weirdness, or however you want to describe it. They blend well as a team versus, some of the other characters, they just had their own thing going on. They didn't naturally feel as invested in being like a Ghostbuster team. The movie focusing more on, of course, Phoebe being the main character and Podcast being her sidekick. I did enjoy those relationships. As I was saying, 2/3 going into the film, I was thinking to myself, if I were to like remake a Ghostbuster film to sort of capture nostalgia, but do so from the standpoint of new characters, as far as Phoebe and Podcast and the teacher, this was a great way to kind of do it. Now, going to my con and tying it to how I felt about the third act, it felt very, very rushed. This is where the film started to take a dive for me, because all that build up, it wasn't consistent in that third act. It felt like they needed to end the film and have cameo appearances by, again, Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Ernie Hudson. Probably the best thing about that third act was the send-off, as Sal mentioned, to Harold Ramis, which was very nice, but how Gozar was able to come back and didn't really do much, really. The character itself felt very relaxed in its rebirth. The way the character was just sitting around and just waiting for things to happen until Phoebe approached it and decided decided to tell some jokes. As much as I like Phoebe's dad joke throughout the film, I thought it was done too much. I wanted that situation to be treated a little more seriously, not only because of the joke not sort of matching the vibe of that scene, but I felt like the film wasn't being taken seriously enough. How they were able to capture one of the canine beasts because of that distraction, I didn't feel like it was handled properly. Overall, I think that was the biggest problem about the film, if I were to say. It's the inconsistency. I thought it could have used maybe an additional 20 minutes or so, I would say, which is funny to say because the original Ghostbusters film was around an hour and 40 minutes long, and Ghostbusters Afterlife is a little over 2 hours long. So the fact that it is longer than the original film and yet struggle to have a steady pacing and develop characters who I should care about for the entirety of the film, that was a little disappointing. Speaking to inconsistency, there were stuff like that about Podcast's character as well, where it felt like he was very knowledgeable of all these phenomena that had happened revolving around the supernatural, and yet when the teacher brought up what happened in New York back in 1984, it seemed like he knew nothing about it. I think the excuse that they came up with was, we weren't born yet. I think that's what Phoebe said, so they wouldn't know about it. But for Podcast to be so into the stuff that he is, and for him to have no knowledge of it, in terms of consistency, that didn't align with what I would expect from his character. And of course, there are like other stuff in the film that weren't consistent as well, such as the first ghost that the kids encounter. I think they named it Munchie or something like that. How this ghost was interested in eating metal. The thing that threw me off about that is it wasn't like the ghost was chewing into metal and you see the metal just, dripping out of the creature, like how in the original Ghostbuster you saw Slimer consuming some food and you saw some of that was just falling through the ghost because the ghost not having that physical form. In terms of consistency with the original, I think they didn't capture that in the right way. And the mom, I do agree with Sal, I would have liked to see more in terms of what happened between her and Egon, because I personally feel that Egon would not have done really what he did to the family, and even to Ray, Peter, and Winston, well, just leaving them the way he did. I know he tried to explain it to them, but I thought the relationship between them was strong enough that he didn't need to resort to that. I felt that was very out of character, even for a person like Egon. So as much as they did honor Harold Ramis, I feel like his character, I thought that was inconsistent with the character that I thought he was based on the original Ghostbuster. Another inconsistency is when the mom found out that secret basement area, but then was overtaken by one of the canine beasts. The way she found that area was through that ghost detecting device. She brought that with her, and then she left it at the top level of that barn area before she took the pole down. And then after she got possessed, you see her back in the house sitting on the chair. Again, very nostalgic to the first Ghostbuster movie. But then the kids, they come back home and you see the ghost detecting device on one of the desks. So unless the mother had still the wherewithal to bring this back after she got possessed, to my knowledge, there was only one of those ghost detecting device. I don't know if that's just being nitpicky, but again, inconsistency is the theme that I'm going with here in terms of what I didn't like about the film. The relationship between Trevor and Lucky, it was like its own thing. I didn't really care much about that because they weren't as invested in the ghost busting theme of the film. I could have really just done without Lucky really as a character. It felt like she just appeared at the end of the film with the proton pack on. The film was trying to force her to have a moment like that, in which I didn't feel they didn't develop enough for a character like her to sort of be in that sort of role. Like I said, her and Trevor, they weren't as invested in being Ghostbuster or into the paranormal. Versus the original characters, Peter, Ray, Winston, and Egon, they were already interested in the paranormal to begin with. So it felt more like a team versus, oh, here is Trevor and Lucky. We'll just throw them in so that we have a fuller squad. I would have been just okay if it was just Phoebe and Podcast. And if they wanted to continue this movie onward with a new team of Ghostbusters, then maybe they recruit new members in the next film or something. At the very least, you could also throw in the teacher, part of the new team, and him put on the suit. But of course, like I said, his character was more to me like Louis. The last thing I will mention in terms of con, and just circling back to what I wanted to talk about in terms of nostalgia, where it sort of hurt the film in that sometimes it did too much and it took away from the potential of original content. There wasn't a lot of originality in the film. Like Sal said, there was a lot of callback to the original, like a reskin, which is fine, but I wanted to see a little more originality because of the nostalgia factor. I thought either scenes could have been done without, which would have set the tone of the film to be a little more consistent as well. The biggest example I could give is the marshmallow scene in which Paul Rudd's character going to Walmart. First of all, I know that the town isn't a very populated area, but you barely saw anybody in that Walmart. It was like late at night. Then maybe show me more employees at least instead of customers. But it seemed like he was one of maybe 2 people in that Walmart at the time because nobody saw what was happening in that aisle with the mini marshmallow man. The scene itself just didn't work for me because it became very childish, maybe aimed more for like pleasing a younger audience. I would have just liked it if he just walked in and saw that canine bees and then, it started to chase him. To me, that would have been better. The theme of the film, I feel like, is consistency in that it was consistent in trying to hold on to nostalgia and letting that sort of drive a lot of the film, but inconsistent in terms of the direction the film was heading and that the sort of mood they were going for. Because at the beginning, I thought the film was trying to go more for like a serious tone with the ghost chasing the mysterious figure in the truck, but I guess this is just a direction that they want to take the film, perhaps if they want to go with like a movie series. I guess one last con I'll mention about the film. Again, I mentioned how desolate the Walmart was in terms of people being there. It also felt that way about the town itself. I think he mentioned to Phoebe, did you know that Somerville has more dead people versus people who are alive or something to that degree? I took that as meaning, okay, just the population of this town is not very high, but I felt that it should have been a little more populated than what I saw. And I say that because I would have liked to see these town people react a little more strongly to seeing the ghosts that they saw. It felt like they weren't scared, really. Even when Phoebe and Podcast saw their first ghost, the way they reacted versus the way Peter, Ray, and Egon reacted when they saw the first ghost in the original Ghostbusters film, where they were scared the heck out of and started running out of the library. There wasn't a moment like that for Phoebe and Podcast. And again, speaking to being consistent to the characters, I think they should have reacted more strongly when they saw their first ghost and been a little more scared. And then just being very adept to using the equipment right off. I know there was a scene where they were testing out the proton pack and the trap device, but I felt like, okay, you had like one scene and you're that proficient at using these technology already. Again, very inconsistent to the characters in terms of how experienced they were at using these stuff. I thought these are things that could have been done over time or through trial and error. Maybe something went wrong and one of the characters got hurt, and that could have been a moment in the film where these characters were at an all-time low. It never really got to that moment. But yeah, just going back to like characters in this film not being scared at ghosts at all. Even the townspeople, I didn't see anybody like really running and screaming at the top of their lungs. And lastly, just there not being enough variety of ghosts. Like there were a couple of ghosts. I mentioned that Munchie character. There was like that skeleton character. There were the 2 canine bees. Gozar, I thought was sort of underplayed. I didn't feel like that character was powerful at all. In that final showdown, it was nice seeing some props outside the movie theater that I was in. One of the local Ghostbusters fanatics in town, they brought their Ghostbuster replica car. They also had like replica proton packs on display. Their vehicle actually was configured in such a way where they had the chair came out of the car, just like in the Ghostbusters Afterlife film. You can actually sit on it. And of course, people who were around the area came there and was taking pictures and stuff with the crew who were also dressed up in the suit and everything. So that was very nice. That took me away when I arrived at the theater. That was a very nice touch and totally something that wasn't necessary, but given the popularity of the film and how much it meant to people, to see these fanatics out there doing what they did for the community, that was very nice. Overall, I still like the film. I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10. Very nostalgic. I think that's the thing that really carried me through the film, in addition to the fantastic job that McKenna Grace did as Phoebe.
I agree with Touly. Some of the scenes lack variation. Like Touly was commenting on their efficiency with the gadgets. I would have liked it to see them try and fail like they did with the original trap, and therefore either Phoebe or Podcast come up with the idea of putting tires on it versus it already has tires and they just come upon it and all of a sudden they know how to control it. So I would have liked it to see them kind of change the equipment to their own needs, but it didn't happen. They just basically said, here it is, and take it as it is. The nostalgia factor is there. I enjoyed the movie as well. Could it have been better? Maybe if the final third of the movie had a little longer time and they would have played more on Peter, Winston, and Ray's character coming back, we could have enjoyed it a lot better. So I guess for my final grade, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. I enjoyed it. I could see myself taking a new generation and they could enjoy the same way I enjoyed the first one. Give it, this is their Ghostbusters. So I guess that does it for this review of Ghostbusters Afterlife. Please join us next time where we're going to review Encanto.
A lot of stairs. But at least I'll have a friend. Nope, you flew away immediately.
Quitter!
Please like, comment, and subscribe. You can find our social media links below. And like always, keep watching movies.